Hello, everyone. Looks like several have joined in. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I see head nods and I see thumbs up, so that's a great start. Let's wait just another minute or two so we can make sure we have adequate attendance for our quorum. Chloe, is that correct, or someone else in the room? I don't know that. Well, is four enough to get started? I should ask that question. Chloe, do you know if 4 is enough?
We do, yeah. We need four members, and it looks like we're there, so we can get started.
Perfect. Oh, we have 4. One more has just joined. I thought I heard a 5th coming. Looks like Michael's joining. Great. Maybe Jill's coming soon. Let's wait 30 seconds, then we'll go and get the meeting started, if that's okay. By the way, I see we have Chief Lee with us and Chief Niemeyer. I've known Chief Niemeyer for a few years at the rival city next door. Good to see you here, Mark.
Good to see you again, Dave.
Thank you. And Jill's with us now. Perfect. All right, thanks. We're going to go and get the meeting started. Welcome to the Development Impact Fee Advisory Committee meeting for June 9th. And I'll call this meeting to order. We'll do a quick acknowledgement that we have a quorum with us today. And I see elections are on here. Chloe, can you tell me what that's about? I think I know, but can you remind me, is this for the positions for the rest of the year?
You're on mute still. We're on mute.
Can you hear us, Dave?
I can hear you. Are you having sound problems again?
Coming back real quick. She was talking to Rob.
The question was about elections.
Yeah.
Yes, what about them?
Hi, Chloe. I think I know what this is. Is this to verify the positions of chair, vice chair for the rest of the year? Or what is this item?
It is, yes. So we need a vote. We should technically do it every year, but we obviously are a little off schedule lately. But yeah, we need just a motion and a second for chair and vice chair. There doesn't need to be any changes if you want to keep going with the positions that we currently have, or if someone wants to throw their hat in the ring to step up, it's up to you guys.
Perfect. Thanks for clarifying. That's what I thought. So we'll just open it up for discussion. I've been chair for several years. I don't mind keep on doing it. It's kind of interesting this past little while where we've been off and on. Now we're on more frequently, which is great, but definitely willing to hand off the reins to somebody if they want to run the meetings as well. So I'll open it up. Is anybody interested in being the chairman of the committee this year, or is there any different nominations?
I think you should keep it up.
You're doing a great job, Dave.
Afraid of that.
I'd like
Unless,
to nominate Dave for chair of the committee.
I heard a nomination, Tony. Thanks. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, Michael, second. I will not oppose the nomination. Thanks, Tony. Appreciate that. Any other nominations?
It's your own fault for being so good, Dave.
I should miss more meetings probably. You're right. Thank you. Any other discussion? Hearing none.
Just to confirm, Corbin is, do we need to vote on Corbin as well?
I think I'd like to have 2 separate motions. We'll do one on the chair, the second is vice chair, if that's okay.
Thank you, sorry.
That's fine. So any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? None, motion carries. Thank you. Now look for motion for vice chair. Corbin's been serving as vice chair. Corbin, are you willing to keep doing it this next year, the rest of the year?
Yes, I am. You do such a good job attending. I don't really have to do much.
Well, thanks for being in the room today. I appreciate you serving as vice chair. Anybody else interested in being vice chair?
Corbin's doing a great job.
Nice, Michael. Okay, having heard that, is there a motion for Corbin to be vice chair for the rest of the year?
I'd like to make a motion. Oh, sorry, Colleen.
Oh, I was gonna make the motion. Sorry,
Yeah.
if you would like to.
No,
Okay.
please.
Okay, certainly. I'd like to make a motion that Corbin continue as our vice chair.
Thanks,
I'd love
Colleen.
to
Is there a
second
second
that.
from Michael?
Yes, I will second that.
Any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Thank you. Motion carries. So thanks, Corbin, for backing me up whenever I'm not around. And thanks, everybody, for your contributions on the committee. We'll keep that moving forward. Next item on the agenda is under new business is minutes from our last meeting, May 12th. If you had a chance to review the packet, the minutes are there. Any discussion? If not, I'll look for a motion to approve the minutes.
I do have discussion.
Okay, Corbin?
I would like it added that I approved because there was no other projects being pushed due to this increase. For the committee share general questions.
Oh, for the North River.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, on section A or B.
Tell me where you are under new business, 3B. Is that what you're suggesting, Corbin?
Yeah,
Okay, can you repeat what you wanted to add to the,
yeah. So in the spot that said the committee share general questions regarding funding sources and timing. I approved, and if anybody else, because of no projects were being pushed due to this increase.
pushed out further? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm okay with that amendment. Any further discussion on the minutes? Thanks, Corbin, for that acknowledgement. With that in mind, look for a motion to approve the minutes with that amendment.
I move that we approve the May 12th minutes with Corbin's amendment.
Thanks, Jill, for the motions. Or a second?
I will second that motion.
Thanks, Michael. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. Got the business out of the way. Now, the fun stuff. We get to hear from our two chiefs, police and fire. Chief Lee, admittedly, I don't think I've met you in person. I've seen you certainly in the news and the good work you do. I'd like to give you some time now to educate us on the police department level of service.
Thank you all very much. Let me hopefully not have tech issues and share my screen with you. So hang on a quick second.
Sure.
Should have my, should just have a title card up there. Is everything working on your end to receive? Perfect.
Yes.
So today I'm going to take a few minutes to talk to you a little about our vision for community policing in our community of Boise and some of the future opportunities to meet the challenges that are ahead. And that will help shape some discussion about sort of the impact and the levels of service that are necessary to meet that. Now, I realize that for the vast majority of you, hopefully you have not had a lot of reasons to interact with the police system. And so it may seem a little bit of a foreign concept to you, or your understanding of the needs to run a major city police department may be more shaped by things from Hollywood than necessarily the reality of what we actually take. And so I'm going to use an analogy as I go through here. I'll reference back to it a few times, but I think that almost all of us, either personally or through a loved one, we've had to interact with sort of the larger infrastructure of the medical system. And so I'm going to draw some parallels there because I think it helps people understand, oh, that's comparable to this. And so that analogy is what I'm going to refer back to, really, this hospital analogy. And I think it's a good one to help understand this depth that's necessary for the department. And so what I want to start out by saying is that as the city grows, we don't expect the police department, our hospital, to really just continue with the model that we have. Part of the challenge that we've had is the city has grown. I think all of you recognize the city has grown at a rate faster than any of us were necessarily recognizing or prepared for. And what we did is we shifted all of our services to meet the emergency room needs. So the 911 calls that come in, the calls for service that we get directed to, that's the emergency room. And as many of you think back on healthcare, you don't really want to manage your healthcare by just sending people to the emergency room. And so what we've had is this shift to emergency room services, and we're really absent some of the other services that we need. They've atrophied in this need to shift the limited pool that we have that's not growing commensurate to the growth rate that we're seeing in the city. And so what we really need in a police department is one that is capable of meeting all of the specialized types of care, the general health care, as well as those emergency room needs. So as the city's grown, what we're seeing is that we have more people coming in, and at the heart of policing is human interaction. The reality of the matter is the more people we add, the more interactions we have. And unfortunately, the more likely some of those interactions will not necessarily go well, and they'll result in a police call for service. Many of those are not going to be crimes, but we're still going to need to respond and conduct that cursory investigation to determine if a crime occurred. That's the emergency room need that we have. But on top of that, we actually will also start to encounter more crimes, and we need the infrastructure to be able to address that, to have what is comparable to, say, an oncologist to treat that particular concern. So what we're seeing is not only do we need to look at physical growth of the city and expansion of what are the city boundaries, we need to look at the types of infill we're seeing there, and we also need to look at the types of density increase to the city and the types of infill for industry that's occurring. Because as more industry arise, we'll see new and different opportunities for crime. As the city has grown, we've already seen a transition in the types of crimes that are occurring. Many of you have probably, staying as informed citizens, you've seen that the general crime rate for the city of Boise is staying fairly consistent as a ratio relative to the population. But if you mine into the data deeper, which is really my job to do, we're seeing an alarming shift in some of the types of crimes that are starting to occur. And that's symptomatic of some of the challenges we have. So as an example, if we look at 2010 for fraud crimes, we had about 815 reported frauds, and they're going to be the ones that don't get reported and captured. By 2019, which is the last clean year of data we've got because we started to get all messed up with the pandemic, that number had jumped to 1,212 reported frauds. There's some of that is business opportunity to defraud businesses. Some of that is also opportunity to defraud individuals that are in the community. Sexual assaults is another prime example. Using the same years as benchmarks, 97 sexual assaults in 2010, 183 in 2019. Because we're beginning to become a more dense city, we're starting to have a greater degree of anonymity. And so crimes like that are starting to occur because of this sort of loss of the personal connection and sense of community that exists. We're also seeing an increase, again, it's just another example, assault and battery on law enforcement. 2010, we only had 34 cases where our officers were assaulted in the line of duty. In 2019, that had jumped to 59. And so we can see that even though the overall crime rate is staying consistent, the nature and the types of crimes that are starting to occur are changing. That will get to a critical tipping point as the city expands, and the rate won't stay the same. What we'll start to see is an exponential demand in police service, and we'll start to see a climb in the crime rate itself if we don't put the proper resources to be able to address it and mitigate that as a risk. One of the other byproducts we're seeing is an increased need to use overtime to meet this service demand. And so as an example, in 2010, there was about $1.6 million spent in overtime. 2020, there wasn't a need for courts, but there were a variety of other things that require police services to maintain public order. That was about $2.3 million in overtime in 2020. So you can see this shift in demand in police services. I'd much rather meet that with fresh, well-rested officers on straight time relative to the service need than be dependent on this overtime and really, being very blunt, overworking officers, because they're not going to provide the same care. The fatigued medical intern in the emergency room probably doesn't give you as much as the fresh one in the emergency room, and that's what we need. And so we're recognizing some of those challenges also in a transition in calls for services. In 2010, under the self-initiated calls for services, which are really the crux of community policing, the ability for me to proactively go out and address a crime, for me to go out and make a non-enforcement community contact to help build trust and legitimacy and to hear what the public's concerns are, to build a relationship. In 2010, we had just over about 90,000 self-initiated calls for service, and we had about just under 90,000 self-initiated calls and about 67,000 calls for service, where somebody picks up a phone and calls and asks for police help. What we saw by 2020, even with the pandemic, that had substantially shifted and changed. I could show you a chart that plots out how this is shifting as we're starting to see the demographic change and the density change in the city. But we're at a place now where instead of 90,000 or over 90,000 self-initiated calls for service, we're now seeing less than 75,000. And then when we see the actual community calling in wanting service, that's jumped up from about 67,000 to over 84,000. So what we're seeing is we need to be able to go out and do more non-enforcement self-initiated calls to be able to deliver community policing. And then we need to respond to those emergency room calls. You know, we need you to see your general healthcare physician, as well as the emergency room needs to be available. And what has happened is the city has changed in the last decade alone. Those two lines have completely inverted. And so we need to look at, when we start to figure out how do we address the service need, how do we right size to get closer to what we had in 2010 when we started to really see the beginning edge of this explosive growth. How do we get there? That's the level of service, not how do we maintain an inverted level of service, because there are reasons that this service level wouldn't be sustainable. So in order to not see the compounding problems in the future and the continued gap in our ability to reach out to marginalized populations and provide those specialized services that we envision being able to deliver as part of community policing, using rough numbers that are easy for everybody to wrap their minds around, there's a need realistically to increase the staffing of the Boise Police Department by roughly 100 officers over the next 10 years. In sitting down and looking at areas where we are under-resourced immediately at this moment in time, we can identify 35 sworn positions now at this snapshot in time where we are under-resourcing to be able to deliver the services that we're promising. So we're already under-resourced. Over what we're authorized, we're short 35. Plus we have vacancies with sort of various different challenges we have with hiring into the public safety sector at present. Recognizing that shift, it would allow us to also address changes in crimes. As I mentioned, some of the crime trends that are changing, we would start to be resourced more appropriately to be able to address issues such as drug trafficking, human trafficking, some of the violent crime rates that we're talking about, seeing the transitions in crime occur. It would afford us the discretionary time necessary to maintain trust and legitimacy. And most importantly, it would afford us the resources to meaningfully actually resolve crimes with as least reliance on use of force as possible. And so there would be a need for additional allocations throughout the city as well, because it's not simply just a personnel resource component, as all of you are aware. In order to increase the staffing as well as to increase the service delivery model to the appropriate levels relative to where they've been allowed to atrophy to, there's a need to develop a new facility in the southeast area of Boise where the city continues to grow. And there's also a need for us to be able to centralize many of our city-wide services, particularly our detective division, somewhere in the downtown core that's more accessible. So for example, if Michael Ellis were the victim of a burglary, I don't know where you live, Mr. Ellis, but if you were the victim of a burglary and you need to do follow-up with a detective, if you happen to live out, say, in Barber Valley, you would have to make the road trip to come all the way out here to the west side of the city. You might think you've arrived in Meridian instead of Boise to find the police department to talk to your detective. We need those people more centralized, not only for you as a resident, but as we see population change, density growth, we see more people relying upon other modes of transportation. We need something that's already pre-engineered to import people to that location to connect to those services, as well as be able to export and deliver those services effectively. So a couple of other numbers that I'll throw out there for you to consider. We sat down recently and had to do an analysis relative to a potential addition and annexation to the city with a particular type of industry that was going there. As a generality, regardless of whether or not it's residential, whether or not it's commercial or it's industrial space, as a very, very round number, what we've seen is that if you add about 120 acres, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.2 officers need to be added relative to the current demand. And remember, policing has this weird exponential growth where you get to a certain level of density, it doesn't just increase per square mile or acre. You start to have more and more contacts and it has a compounding effect. And so that number is a good number to gauge right now relative to the size of the city up until we get about to 300,000 people in population. We'll start to see that number increase more dramatically after that. The other number that I'd like to throw out for you all to think about is that even if we were to sit down and look at the average number of officers per 1,000 residents, which is a very rough gauge to gauge the ability to deliver service, if we look at our peer cities, they're at 1.8 officers per 1,000. If we look at the national average, they're at 2.4 officers per 1,000. The International Association of Chiefs of Police, the Police Executive Research Foundation, both major critical think tanks about police services, recommend that 2.0 per thousand is the number that you should try and hold. We're at 1.26 officers per thousand right now. My former employer, the city of Portland, I don't think that there's anybody that wouldn't watch the news and say that the city of Portland, it isn't a policing crisis. They're in a policing crisis at 1.3 officers per thousand. We're below them. I have the good fortune of having an incredibly nice community here, and it gives me some advantages. But as we see different changes in the community, that will become, we shouldn't be counting on being able to deliver good police service because of kindness. We need to be prepared for other changes. So,
Chief Lee, could I interrupt you just for a quick
Please.
second? You gave us some numbers there. Did you say Boise is currently 1.8 per thousand?
1.26.
1.26, thank
Or-
you.
Our sister cities, right, are 1.8.
Our peer cities that we recognize for review, their average comes out at 1.8. The national average of police relative to population is 2.4. The recommended standard per IACP and the Police Executive Research Foundation is 2.0. They do not recommend going below that. So I think that that's not the best metric to use because there's a lot of nuanced stuff, but it's a very rough gauge, but it does point to how under-resourced we are relative to the growth we've seen. And we need to fix that, or we're going to continue to have a decline in service, not even a hold in the ability to deliver the services we have, much less meet the promise of the services that we tell the community we can meet relative to the challenges of actually doing it now.
Fair enough. Thank you. I appreciate it. And then you said Portland. I have friends in Portland. I know what's going on there in Seattle, but you said Portland's 1.3. Is that correct?
It is at 1.3. Having worked there and having the chief be a good friend of mine, him and I've had many venting phone conversation about the challenges there. And at 1.3, once you hit that critical mass of human contact and you start to see more and more demand for police services, your only choice for meeting it is to stop responding to certain types of calls.
Right.
That is not at all what we want to do. so
Thank you. You can keep moving. I just want to clarify the numbers. I'll let you
Well,
keep
no,
moving.
I think that this helps paint a very high level, broad brush idea of some of the challenges ahead. And really going back to that analogy, our vision is to be able to offer emergency response, quality wraparound services, as well as specialized services and specialized response, especially to our most vulnerable communities. You know, when we talk about increased calls to mental health, I need clinicians paired with officers. I need to be able to grow that portion of the police department. I need to be able to grow training, education, development to ensure that we have well-educated, well-informed, connected to the community officers that are using cutting-edge techniques to deliver police services. So very high level, I think that hopefully captured it. And I'd like to open the floor very quickly, if I can stop sharing the screen with all of you. How do I stop? Let's see. There we go. I'd like to open the floor to any of you if you have any quick questions, and I'll gladly hand the microphone over to my colleague, Chief Niemeyer.
Again, thank you, Chief Lee. You and I have not yet personally, certainly seen in the press a little bit, and compliment you for your service. Thanks for your presentation today.
Thanks, sir.
And sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you in your very closing comments. That was not my intent, but thank you for your.
No, it's okay. I probably should have let you know how many slides I'm cooking through.
That's okay. So I'm going to open up. I see some hands raised. Colleen first, then Michael second.
Chief Lee, what concerns do you have with the legislation that was passed this year on property tax and how that will affect budgeting for the city going forward?
I have some fairly significant concerns. I am waiting for the full financial analysis from my colleagues in finance to sit down and really wrap my arms around what are the long-term compounding impacts of that approach. With that said, I think part of the challenge is we need to grow the department. That has a cost factor alone, but we are also not from a salary standpoint. If we look at ourselves as the Western United States marketplace for policing, we're not competitive in the wage. And so there's both a challenge for how do I right size that entry wage to draw top quality candidates, because I don't want the candidates that couldn't succeed elsewhere coming here. I want top quality people. I want the local folks that are in the profession able to make a wage where they can live and stay in the community, not suddenly have to move to Middleton. So that's a very real challenge. I am concerned that there will be long-term impacts that will limit our ability to grow the way we need to. I don't want to speak entirely out of school because I am waiting for sort of the deep dive analysis to really have a better understanding of those impacts, but it does give me pause.
Colleen, do you have any follow-up to that?
No, I think that's, that, you know, in terms of the ability to, meet the needs of mental health of officers, but also dealing with mental health in the in neighborhoods and, responding to events with, individuals with mental health is, you know, one of my big concerns here in our community, that we are able to sufficiently address those.
So we have made some substantial programmatic designs here at the police department to help address those issues. So 40 hours of crisis intervention training is generally the benchmark for building a specialized team for dealing with people in crisis. That is now required training and has been delivered to every sworn member of the police department. So every officer here is trained as to what you would likely get as a specialist. Say if you went to Chattanooga, it's just a town. I'm thinking of that because that's where my sister lives, just got married. So, you know, that's 40 hours is what they get. We have advanced training for those that opted in early. Plus we have a behavioral health response team, which is expanding, which pairs officers with mental health clinicians to not just respond during moments of acute crisis, but recognize those people that are drawing the criminal justice system as their point of social service contact regularly, that really mental health is the underlying issue, and to try and intervene and get them the meaningful services, not at that moment of full-blown worst case scenario crisis, but really try and contact them when they may be receptive to getting the help that they need, to avoid having them be dependent on the criminal justice system. The reality is many people that access the criminal justice system are individuals that are marginalized in community and don't have the same social support networks that you or I may enjoy. And that's why frequently the police, either they call the police directly or people call the police for them, because they really don't have those social service nets there to help them. We need to be capable of connecting them with the right resources to actually address the underlying root problem and help people live more productive lives.
Thank you, Chief Lee. I appreciate that. I'll save my long podium speech about House Bill 389 for another day, but I'm very appreciative of City of Boise and frankly, almost all the cities, not all, but almost all the cities in the state that are taking a pause to thoroughly understand the financial impacts before they make knee-jerk reactions. Boise's being one of them. So I won't go into that at this moment. We can maybe take it up in open forum. Let's see next, Michael, your turn. What question do you have?
Thank you, David. Thank you for your time, Chief Lee. Just as a backdrop, I was a City Hall West employee for 4 years with Boise Fire as their fire technical analyst under then Deputy Chief Perry Oldenburg. I feel like I probably spent more time with police officers than probably the rest of the committee combined, just before and after work, working out with them in the gym. And I wish the community could see them the way I saw them, which is just wonderful servants. And I feel like sometimes the perception of police is not what I got to see every day, which was shining examples of living in a wonderful town. I wanted to ask about overtime and staffing shortages. I know the impacts of overtime can lead to burnout, and to your point, like, right, the physician who's working 72 hours straight is not going to perform as well as the one who's got fresh 8 hours of sleep. Is the idea that to combat staffing shortages, we just add more officers to existing like 7 to 7 shifts, or is it, hey, do we need to add a new shifts in there to kind of cover overlapping, gaps in coverage?
No, so one of the projects I was able to lead in my former place of employment was actually to sit down and do a very data-driven analysis of when were the critical needs for service, what was optimal minimum staffing to actually meet based off of safety, with the idea of the types of calls that were actually coming in, what was the historic number of officers needed to initially respond, what was the actual amount of time that an officer spent on that type of call. Because the big mistake most people do when they do a staffing study as a police executive is they go, oh, we get a lot of calls now, and so I need cops at that time. Well, if all the calls you're getting are, say, cold burglaries and car prowls, one officer can go to that. If you're having fights in progress, you're having armed robberies, you're having other things, that is an entirely different volume of officers you need to deploy. You need to actually look at how many get sent by protocol, how many actually have to go to have an optimal safe resolution with a minimum reliance on force, and then how many hours do they have to spend there. And so part of it is that some of our data capture mechanisms here in the department, and frankly with our partners in the county for dispatch, they're not as strong as they need to be. We're trying to construct some of that information now to be able to build that type of analysis, which is a very long-winded way of saying some of this we can meet by adjusting shifts and adjusting, like, how heavy do we staff on a certain day versus another day. Some of that will maybe help lighten the load, but it's a little bit like saying you're bleeding really bad, put on a tourniquet, don't see the doctor.
Where's the blood coming from, right? You know,
And that's what
how
we
do
need to fix.
Yep. Thank you for your time. Thank you for answering my question. Appreciate it.
No, thank you.
Michael, do you have any follow-ups?
No, I appreciate it. Appreciate Chief Lee's time.
Okay, I'm looking through here. Colleen, your hand's still up in the air. Do you have another question, or is that for before? All right. Any other questions for Chief Lee? I see
Go ahead.
one. Corbin, go ahead.
Yep. There, Chief Lee, I have a question. You mentioned that you're short 35 officers right now that you were authorized to hire. Did I hear you right saying that you could be hiring 35 right now? Or is that just what you're short? Is that in the budget to hire right now?
No, I think probably a virtue of drinking too much coffee to stay awake. I speak a little too fast sometimes. We have right now, just using ballpark numbers because they're easy, we're short about 30 officers from the authorized FT, so actual vacancies. Even if we had those vacancies filled and we look at workload need, like where are we under resource? You know, I know that I'm missing a detective here because there's a vacancy as an example. That still wouldn't help me meet the workload. If I had 30 officers, the 30 vacant positions filled, I would still need another 35 roughly officers to meet the actual workload here to be able to deliver the type of service we're talking about delivering at this particular moment in time. And then if I start to chart out and look at growth of the city, if we are experiencing the sustained sort of growth rates we have for the last 6 years, frankly, 10 officers a year, you know, getting to this 100 officer thing is frankly being on the conservative side.
So, yes, so very much a shortage, really.
That would be an easy way of saying it, sir.
Okay, I had one more question regarding
Go ahead, Corbin.
the 90K service in 2010 and how that dropped to 75K service in 2020, I believe it was 2020. Was this because the drop, just because that was less calls responded to, or was that an actual drop in calls in service?
No, so if we talk about calls for service where somebody picks up a telephone and says, hey, I need the police, whether that's emergency, non-emergency, in 2010, we would have had just under 75,000, all right? By the time we get to present day, it's about 84,000. So we're seeing a jump in about 10,000 over the last decade, increased calls for service. And there's a couple of things that, as a police executive, they matter to me. Probably as a community, it's probably not discussed a lot, but we have to recognize that as we call more for police officers and our response times diminish, there's actually, I'm trying to think of the right word for it. My brain just blanked out, but basically people become a little bit numb to what they call police for, and we actually aren't capturing calls for service. Like the 2020, what people pick up a phone and call us for in 2020 is not the same stuff they would have in 2010. So there's actually more stuff we probably should be responding to that just isn't even getting generated. And that happens in almost every city as it grows. The big switch that's important to understand here is that if we look at self-initiated activity, like when I call dispatch and say, hey, I'm going to go out, I'm going to talk to this person, or hey, there's this suspicious person, or I need to contact a community member and talk to them about X, Y, or Z. 2010, we had over 90,000 individual incidents where we self-initiated the activity. By the time we get to 2020, we're at less than 67,000. So over a 23,000 call a year drop in the amount. And that has everything to do with the officers are being overworked, because remember, we may have only seen a 10,000 increase call for service, but those, because there's likely a potential crime that's occurred, a much more complex interaction. So as those numbers creep up, they impact the amount of discretionary time disproportionate. It's not like a 1-for-1 swap out, if that makes sense. And so if you actually sit and look at the chart, the two lines go like this. They completely invert over the last decade, which is, it's not good. We need to get back to one where we're able to do more self-initiated activity if we intend to stay committed to a community policing model, which is actually the most effective way for us to meaningfully address crime, particularly violent crime and interpersonal crime.
When you say self-initiated, you mean police initiated?
Yes, the police officers stop and say, hey, there wasn't a call for service. Sometimes those get miscoded. It's the person on the sidewalk doing this, waving their arm. But that is the vast majority of the time. I'm going to do extra patrol here. I'm going to talk to the community member. I see a subject that's acting suspicious. That's what I'm talking about. And the ability for us to do that, the preventative medicine model, right? The ability for us to go and, hey, did you get your checkup? Did you have XYZ test run? We are no longer able to do that. We're just waiting until you show up to the emergency room.
Corbin, do you have any follow-ups to your questions?
No, that was it. Thank you very much.
You bet. Jill, did you have any further questions? Okay, I'll look to the rest of the committee. Any other questions? Or if not, do you have any concluding
I
comments?
believe Tony's trying to get my attention.
Yeah,
Tony.
sorry, Dave. I don't know if I might be off your screen, so
You are. I'm looking for you. So thank you. Go ahead, Tony. I'm so sorry.
that's all right. Chief Lee, I wish you good luck with the staffing. I know that's a challenge that we can't really meet from the development impact fee standpoint. You inherited the sort of satellite police station project that was built with development impact fees in the downtown area. When you talk about a facility in Southeast Boise, are you talking about something on that scale, or would your vision be for something larger than what we constructed downtown in that satellite?
There's really a couple of different models, and depending on which model we can do relative to real estate, it is something larger than that. How much larger depends on whether or not we can have other satellite offices co-located with fire stations, depending on where that real estate is and it makes sense. We may be able to do an altered model. But using traditional modeling, we're talking about building an entire other police precinct on the other side of the city. And frankly, the facility downtown, from a variety of, just as it is whenever you build things, you know, it always gets more expensive. Really, that footprint shrank from what it was originally envisioned. We kept the plans for what it was envisioned to be as a potential phase 2. That phase 2 really needs to be implemented in order to build that down, because that's downtown real estate so expensive. That's the logical place to build something centrally located, as I mentioned, for detectives and other centralized services to respond from.
Okay, thank you.
Tony, I apologize. I flipped my screen around, so I will see you now. I don't know how. Anyway.
I know how that happens on Zoom and group meetings. Like somebody
I was
winds up in the
looking through, I
corner.
was
Or off.
looking, and anyway, I see you now. I got a different full video screen here. So
That's all right.
do you have any follow-ups, Tony? Any other questions?
No, I'm interested to hear that. Thank you, Chief Lee.
Yeah. Chief Lee, I just have a follow-up to Tony's there. Have you identified the parcel ground in Southeast Boise? Are you, and if not, do you know what size you're looking for?
I think that it depends on really some of the other parcels that fire is looking at and which model we're able to commit to. So it's a fairly fluid look right now. It is likely what would make sense depending on growth and growth projections to the south of the city, which is the logical place for affordable housing to grow. What parcel of land, essentially, do we go north of the river or south of the river is part of the question to look at. But using some just broad sort of ideas for you, depending on the growth model, it's either something sort of in that Barber Valley area, or it's something closer over to like where the outlets used to be in Columbia Village and that. So somewhere in there, we would need something to at least build a facility of 25,000 square feet, if not larger, depending on which model we're able to move forwards with, which again, some of that ties to, as fire identifies parcels to build fire stations, which are a little easier to figure out, does it make sense to buy a larger parcel at that same location and co-locate some of the uniform patrol type deployment resources, just start their day there to buy back time?
Thank you. That's, I've worked with Chief Niemeyer before. He's really good about being flexible. And I say that in a positive way, recognizing flexibility is required. Mark knows sometimes I beat him over the head with my demands sometimes too. And nonetheless, he's very good about trying to meet the needs of the public. So I appreciate both of you. Before we go to Chief Niemeyer, Chief Lee, do you have any further comments for us?
No, I would just add that if any of you have any other questions, please reach out to me through my office and we'd be happy to try and clarify anything. I know how it is. I usually end the Zoom meeting about 5 minutes afterward. I come up with like 6 more questions I meant to ask. So I'm happy to address any of those as they come up.
Very good. Well, thank you. And I know I'm being recorded, so I shouldn't have said I beat Chief Niemeyer over the head when he's in Meridian. That's not what I really ever do. But I really do respect both of you and appreciate your service to the community.
Thank you.
Chief Niemeyer, your turn. You may have a presentation, or I'm not sure what you have for us,
I
but
do, Dave, and thank you. And yes, that's recorded. Yes, I'm going to hold that against you. So you owe me one now.
I owe you more than one.
Michael, it's good to see you again. I don't know if you remember, we did a little bit of work way back in the day. So just by way of introductions real quick, you may have seen my appointment in the news, not sure, but wasn't the most traditional appointment, but it worked, and we're in kind of untraditional times. So I'm thrilled to be here. As Dave alluded to, I spent the last 10 years as the fire chief over at Meridian. So the reason I bring that up is I'm really familiar with impact fees in Idaho. We had an impact fee committee as well. Very familiar with Galena and Westcott and some of the work she does. Understand a little bit the nuanced differences between how impact fees have been laid out in Boise versus Meridian, but really those are small differences. And like you, Dave, I'm not going to comment on House Bill 389. Other than to say there's a little bit of concern about what might happen next year as opposed to this year. So we'll stay on top of that. I'm on the board of the Idaho Fire Chiefs Association. We have voiced concerns over some of those issues, and we'll see if we can work through them. So I'll get away from the politics there.
Well, when you do, we'll work with you, Mark, sincerely.
Yeah.
It's a community solution on this, so hopefully we can find some common resolution.
Yeah, and we met with Mike Moyle and Jim Rice, said we want to be a part of the solution, but we don't want to see legislation passed that's going to hamper or hurt public safety and the ability to respond, right, and take care of
We
the
agree.
communities.
We all agree. Yeah, thank you.
John Evans and some others. So we'll hopefully find a good solution there. I'm like Ryan. I'm going to share the screen. I'll just mention Ryan real quick. For those of you that haven't met him, outstanding public servant and great human being. I've really enjoyed working with him. I had a great relationship with Chief Levy and Meridian. You kind of mentioned that the PD collaboration with fire. It was something that Chief Levy and I were working on Meridian, co-locating fire stations and police stations where possible and where feasible. As far as acreage goes, Dave, what we were working on over there was about 3.5 to 4 acres, only because that's some gated stuff. And we did a lot of work with parks too. So we had one location that was going to be co-located in a park in South Meridian, one that was going to be co-located in a development right next to the new Hawaii High School. So we tried to find land that really met the call volume and the response volume, but also when we can partner with even parks, that makes it even better because now you've got community resources right with the community in a park. And so we've talked to Doug Holloway about that a little bit too, just futuristic, looking down the road and seeing where we can partner. But with that, let me try and share my screen, see if I can make technology work for my needs like Ryan did for his. And Dave, if you could just say yes when you see it, I'm going to keep it kind of in the mode it's in, but if you could just give me a nod that you see it.
Yeah, we see it.
Awesome. Okay. So really, first slide is just our mission, right? It's simplistic in its statement. We try and keep things simple, but it's very complex in its delivery. It's protecting lives, property, and the environment. That's really what we're here for. It's what we do. When we talk about a little bit more detail about what we do, we call ourselves an all hazards fire department. You may have heard that term before. What that means is we don't just fight fire. That's what fire departments used to do. And then they were asked to do more, specifically in the medical arena. And like Chief Lee, we have seen our challenges in the call volume increases on the medical side, specific to mental health. We have partnered with Ada County paramedics as far as the community paramedicine or community paramedic response goes. We plan to continue to enhance that. We are on the EMS side, and you've probably heard this before, part of an EMS system. So we work under one shared system that's called ACCESS, Ada County City Emergency Services System. It's all 6 fire departments in Ada County, along with Ada County paramedics working as one, essentially. Very proud of that because it brought multiple government agencies together, which, as you know, sometimes doesn't always work well. And we've been able to make it very successful, so much so that the county and sometimes the cities look to us to say, how did you decide to get along? Because sometimes we can't. And so we've tried to be a model at that. But if you look further into the all hazards, with fire prevention, education, technical rescue, hazardous materials or hazmat response, which is a regional team for the state. So we cover not just Ada County, but 3 other counties as well. Wildfire or wildland fires, we'll talk a little bit about that. Swift water and dive rescue, and then airport rescue firefighting. We're the one department in the Treasure Valley who actually has, by requirement, an airport rescue firefighting force out at the Boise Airport. Again, keeping things fairly simple, and again, complex in its delivery, as is community expectations. So the first expectation we hear constantly is get here fast. And we've helped define fast a little bit. That's our performance standards. You'll hear Ann call that level of service quite often. That's made up of 3 components: the dispatcher taking the call, the dispatcher pushing the button and getting that call to our station, and then us leaving the station and getting to the scene. And so those are the 3 components of levels of service. And that's when we talk about impact fees, that's really what we're talking about, is how do we maintain levels of service to the community. They expect us when we get there to solve their problem. And we have all kinds of problems to solve. It's not just fires anymore. When folks don't know what to do, they either call us or they call the police department, one of the 2. And so when we get there, our folks need to know how to solve all kinds of problems, not just fires, and then provide excellent service. And what that means is we're a community partner. And so we do a lot of partnership with the community. We're very proud of that, and we'll continue to do that moving forward. We're also very outcome based. So there's a reason when we talk about time is of the essence, there's a reason for that. As fires continue to grow without water being applied to them, and again, I'm keeping that very simple, more devastation occurs. And so using science as our backdrop, we have developed response time standards that we strive for that helps minimize and mitigate emergencies. And so when we talk about turnout time, what we're talking about there is the time from when the bells go off in the station till the time we roll out the door. And that goal that we have is 90 seconds, 90% of the time. So if you ever wonder what that really looks like, set your alarm clock at 2 in the morning, have it go off at 2 in the morning, see how quickly you can get out to your car and back your car out of the garage without running into your garage door. Please be careful if you do that. And then our goal is to get wherever we're going to get to in 5 minutes or less, 90% of the time. Now that's challenging with the growth in the whole valley, but in the city as well, the traffic congestion, the road construction. Sometimes we have weather that affects that. Getting there in 5 minutes, 90% of the time is tough, but it's how we place our stations that helps us achieve that goal or push towards that goal. We are always looking to continue to get better. So we will continually evaluate our performance. If we see anomalies that we're not meeting that performance, we look into what is it that's causing that. We have a great data analyst. We have a great IT team that can help us dive into some of that data and look for why we're not performing the way we should be. And then we also look for how can we continue to meet our goals. An example of that would be Station 8 on Overland. That was a remodeled station not too long ago. It used to be at the old Station 8 that I worked out of actually for a while. The bedrooms were all upstairs. Well, if you look at the new Station 8 on Overland, we have all the bedrooms downstairs. We have living quarters, kitchen, workout room, all that kind of stuff upstairs. But the bedrooms are downstairs. And the intent behind that, and it's been proven out that way, is that we can get, especially at 2 in the morning, we can get out to the engine a lot faster if we're sleeping on the ground floor than if we're sleeping on the second floor. So we've redesigned our stations to meet the need to get out the door as quickly as we can. We're very happy with that. Like Chief Lee, we're looking at some increased demand. You'll see first a 1% annual increase in calls citywide over the time frame that we studied from 2017 to 2020. That doesn't sound like a lot. Some of that dropped a little bit because through our EMS system, we identified calls that the fire engine did not need to go to. We also identified calls that the ambulance did not need to go to that we could. So working as a system, we tried to balance the call volume and the workload there. But we are seeing very significant increases in call volume in Northwest Boise and also the Southwest. We'll talk a little bit about that as far as needs in those 2 areas. We are tracking call volume very closely, and I cannot tell you scientifically why this is, but we have studied fire departments. I've been studying fire departments for a while, and it seems like in metro cities like ours, when the call volume hits 30,000 calls, I don't know why. I wish I could tell you why. We start to see call volume increases significantly year over year over year. I don't know what it is. It's a population thing, but we've studied cities like Henderson, Nevada, Reno, and others that when they hit that 30,000 call volume increase, all of a sudden their annual call volume starts to rise significantly every year. So we're watching that very closely because as you can see, we're rising towards that 30,000 mark. The complexity really is what I've been talking with City Council about, and it's something that I think is important for all of you to understand as well. What we call the bread and butter calls, the fire and EMS responses, those are going up slightly. We're seeing very significant rise in our complexity on our river recreation, our foothills recreation, our high-rise fire. You probably saw in the news a couple months ago, we almost had back-to-back issues within the high-rise arena. We had a fire in one, we had a rescue in another. And then our wildland urban interface. More homes are being built in that wildland urban interface. And the reality is, and I've been a part of wildfire committees with the Western Fire Chiefs for a while now, and this year is no different. We're in a drought yet again this year. And my wife cannot understand that. She said, but it snowed a lot. And I said, yeah, but we're in a drought. I was on the Boise River last Friday with our dive team. The river was running about 1,100 CFS, and now it's down to about 720. This is the earliest it's ever been that low. And it's simply because they don't have the water, they're trying to protect it. So when you add that drought to the grasses that we have in the foothills, you can see those and they're growing, continuing to grow. That just makes for a significant wildfire threat. And so that's just really 4 areas that we're starting to see quite a bit of rise in. Our other complexities, hazmat is hazmat. It's the stuff that nobody wants to go near, including myself. I was always comfortable looking out with my thumb and seeing the work that they do. Airborne fire and rescue, the airport's getting bigger and it's getting busier. I think we got an update from Rebecca. You've seen the nonstop flights that have been added out of the airport. That airport's going to get busier as more people move here. A significant threat we have is the tank farms right next to St. Al's. Not a good place to have tank farms in a hospital, but both have been there for a long time, but that is a threat for us that we keep a very close eye on. Our collaboration with law enforcement, we're doing things with law enforcement that quite honestly in my 30-year career, early on, I never did. We didn't have active shooter training. We didn't have training where we partner with police officers, firefighters, and paramedics to go into a warm zone or a hot zone. And that's just the reality of the world we live in now. So that collaboration with law enforcement, we're happy to do it. We're proud to do it. We have a great relationship with Boise PD. That's very good to say. Not all places do. But that's increasing in complexity. And then our incident management team that not only deploys here, but is requested to deploy regionally to go help manage incidents. We have managed the Weiser flooding simply because we have the resources to go help. So what does the future look like? And really, this is a discussion I've had with council as well. What do we want to do? We have 3 options. We can maintain service, we can decrease service, or we can enhance and expand service. Our recommendation from fire is to maintain our service levels. We're not in a position right now to add a lot of new services. We certainly don't want to decrease services. So we would like to maintain the services we have. We think we provide a great service to the community, but like Chief Lee, we're stretched pretty thin. We're going to get there very simply by community engagement, mayor and council engagement, listening to our firefighters, the boots on the ground that have to actually go out and do the work and asking them what's working and what's not. City department partnership, that's one thing that I committed to the mayor. I love partnering with the rest of the city, with the Parks Department, HR, and others to find solutions to community problems. And then our partnership engagement, continuing that in our EMS system and our fire departments. We have a great relationship with the other fire departments. I even like the New Meridian, Chief Dave, so don't spread any bad rumors. So what do we need? What does the future look like? One of the things that quite honestly we don't have right now in the department, I was a little bit surprised, is a 10-year staffing plan. It's something that I was used to having. Chief Lee is kind of in the same boat. So the city leadership has approved a public safety staffing plan. You heard him say 35 officers, 105 over several years as a need. We're in the same boat. We need fire stations and we need some addition to our special teams if we're going to continue to maintain that service. So we're looking at 1 new station in the Northwest. That was something I walked into as the new chief, that station that hasn't been built in the Northwest. So we're moving forward with that. We have a good plan in place that we've been communicating with some of the neighbors in the Northwest. And then the growth in the Southwest right now is a big concern for us. There's a lot of potential annexation, a lot of development going on south of the airport that we just can't respond to in a timely manner. So we're probably looking at 1 to 2 stations in the Southwest and South over the next 5 to 10 years. Also a ladder truck for the Southwest. We do not have any ladder capability out there. And as our commercial development and industrial development continues out there, that will be a need. And then a quick response EMS unit. I think, Dave, you heard me say this in writing as well, as we try and manage the EMS call volume load and keep some of our critical resources in service, not send ladder trucks to medical calls downtown on a Saturday night. a quick response, two-person type unit that can respond to those calls is a need. It's a different way of responding to maintain the service level. And so we're gonna work on that. Fire inspectors, Romeo, Chief Gervais division, if you've met Chief Gervais, as we continue to grow out our commercial and business development and our businesses, 1 to 2 additional fire inspectors might be needed. We are in discussions about possibly a combination of sworn personnel and then non-sworn or civilian personnel, and tag teaming those two together to do inspections. We'll see how that plays out. And then the last is just personnel and capital resources to manage the increasing call volumes in the recreational areas. And that was a discussion with council. Do you want us to continue to be on the river and provide rescue? And they said yes. You probably saw our dive team out last week trying to mitigate snags and everything else along the river. That's a service we provide. Work hand in hand with Ada County Parks to ensure that the 1 million people that are going to float the Boise River this year don't get snagged underneath a log. But even at that, we're literally on the river. Once they start floating, we're on the river almost all day, especially on the weekends, because somebody gets stuck, somebody gets lost, somebody gets out and their friends didn't see them get out. So now we have a missing person and we're on the river trying to locate them. So it's almost become a full-time job on the weekend. Right now, that responsibility is handled out of the Fire Station 1 and the crews out of Station 1. We're in discussions for this summer, knowing that our river is going to be packed this year. How do we maybe get some extra staffing in? And Ryan alluded to it. Sometimes you have to use overtime to do that, but how do we cover the river knowing our call volume is going to increase? So with that, Dave, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Like Chief Lee, I talk fast. I think Mayor McLean accused me of being the fastest talking director now in the city of Boise because I gave a presentation to council during the budget season. So Chief Lee's got something to shoot for.
Well, Mark, you're a friend. Thanks for your presentation. I'm not sure I want to see the police chief and the fire chief compete for who can drink the most coffee and then speak the fastest, but that's up to you guys. With that, are there any questions for Chief Niemeyer? Michael, go ahead.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, Chief. Yeah, great to see you virtually. We got to work on the ESO project back in the day.
Yep.
My question is, you talked about level of service for City of Boise. I was just wondering, you said those 5 minutes. What does level of service look like for, Whitney and NACFR districts? Because I don't believe they're the same as far as level of service.
Yeah, we're working on that right now, Michael. That's a great question. I've got Chief Brown that's working on the contracts for both of those, one with Whitney, one with NACFR. NACFR is a little bit interesting. They got Station 16 open right now. Station 18 is not. We'd love to get Station 18 open. That's a mutual benefit for both the city of Boise and for NACFR. Hidden Springs a little bit different, right? That's a level of service that we're not going to meet in 5 minutes. That's more of a rural kind of out there area. And then with Whitney, it's interesting. They've never demanded kind of a level of service be articulated. I'm not in that boat. I'd like to articulate a level of service. So for us, it depends. Hitting the Whitney station that's kind of within what do I want to say, an urbanized population area, 5 minutes is still applicable. If we're talking about way south Whitney, where we're getting back into that rural or suburban area, it takes us a little bit longer. That's the challenge with anything outside of city limits. The further out you get, just the reality is it's going to take us longer to get there.
And thank you very much, Chief. I just want to say for my fellow committee members, Chief gave a great analogy of when Station 1's on the river, right? They're on a swiftwater rescue boat. So if a call comes into their district, then Station 2 in the Highlands area or Station 3 is probably trying to get there. And so to Chief Niemeyer's point, getting that 5 minute mark is even harder because now you're having stations come out of district to try to get there in time. So kudos, Chief. Thought you did a great job in Meridian when I worked for Boise, and happy to see you working for City of Boise now.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Mike. And I would agree. I think Boise stole a good guy from Meridian. Colleen, you have a hand raised. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dave. In terms of meeting the needs of continued growth downtown and high rise, does the increased height and density of the high rise buildings downtown change, or I guess if you, for an individual residential, change the need and the cost of response, that the impact fee would be different there versus, for what it could cover versus what just a general subdivision and or areas built up into the foothills would cost?
Great question, Colleen. I don't think the cost is going to be a problem for us, whether it's downtown versus a more suburbanized part of our city. It's all about how many resources can I put in an area to meet the need, right, and meet the demand. So that's why I talked about that quick response EMS unit would be a downtown addition to augment the response so that our engines and our ladder trucks aren't tied up running EMS calls. And then we have a high-rise fire, we have a elevator rescue or something else happens. So I don't know that cost by geographic location within our city is the challenge. I think it's just a matter of, can I get enough resources within those areas that have the need and the demand to then meet the response needs.
So you'll basically still be able to rescue my mother who's moving into a high-rise downtown.
Yep. Our
Okay.
crews are really good at high-rise. Yep, they're really good at what they do.
Any
Thank you.
follow-up, Colleen?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions for, Corbin's hand's up. Go ahead, Corbin.
Thank you, Chief Niedermeyer. I had a question when it comes to, sounds like your main needs right now are more infrastructure, building stations at this point. One, is that fair to say? Two, when you build a station, does that require also hiring personnel to be in that said station?
Yep.
So on top of that.
There's the big cost. The stations, with our impact fee collection, we can build stations, we can build them pretty timely. We can buy the fire engines that need to go in those stations. It's adding the personnel. And when we open up a fire station, it's 12 firefighters, plus promotions, right? Because we have 3 captains covering all 3 shifts. We have 3 engineers or senior firefighters, and then we have firefighters. So it's not just hiring 12 firefighters, it's also then doing a promotional exam, promoting folks to fill those needs. And that's really where the city challenge is it's about $1.6 million in personnel costs when we open up a fire station year 1. So it's a big lift. So I always respect the city and how they have to balance the needs of every department. But as Chief Lee alluded to, if we want to maintain our level of service, that's what the need is moving forward.
Corbin, any follow-ups?
Yeah, so it is fair to say that you have a personnel shortage as well.
Yep. Yeah. And just to give you an example, and we use multiple data points to really talk about our staffing needs. So the firefighters per 1,000 is, I think Chief Lee alluded to this as well. It's simply one data point as you're looking to compare, but we're at 1.17 per 1,000 population. The Western states average is 1.52 per 1,000. So we're about 30 firefighters short based on the average. Now it's just one data point, right? We use several of them to articulate our need to council. Really, it's about community expectations and can we meet the expectations? And as I alluded to, we need a couple more fire stations and we need a couple of these augmented units to help handle the load.
Colleen, your hand's raised. Go ahead.
Yes, in terms of wildland urban interface, what are we currently doing with preventative fire-wise management within the community and the developments in conjunction with Boise Fire and the city?
Yeah, great question, Colleen. I'm super proud of our folks. We've got a division chief that oversees our wildfire division. He's outstanding, came out of Colorado, Tony Piscopo. So he has been leading our planning efforts as far as mitigating in the foothills. We also have a fire prevention captain that goes out. So we have a chipper program that we are chipping brush. We're educating on fire resistant brush around homes, a lot of public education going on. And then we have a great working partnership with BLM so that any fire in that wildland urban interface area gets an immediate response from Boise Fire and from BLM. So we're on top of that. So I'm really proud of the work that our guys are doing, our guys and gals, to mitigate. We also have really good plans in place. We have a computer program called Intera that has our entire wildland deployment in it, access points. So I can comfortably say we are ready for a fire, but I pray we don't get one because there's some controllables that we can't control, like wind. The Oregon Trail fire, I was obviously in Meridian when that happened, but we sent units over to assist with that. That was a wind-driven fire. And the only difference right now between us and California, if I'm being honest, is Santa Ana winds in California. We don't have those. But everything else is very similar. Terrain is similar, vegetation is similar, homes in that vegetation area in that wild urban interface. So we just pray that if we do have a fire, we don't have a wind-driven fire.
Thanks, Chief. Any other follow-ups, Colleen?
No, that's what I needed. Thank you so much.
Anybody else have any questions for Chief Niemeyer? Mark, any final comments you want to share?
No, just again, happy to be here. Like Ryan, if you have questions afterwards, don't hesitate to reach out, peg me with questions. Dave doesn't hesitate. So you can get them to him and he can get them to me, or you can get a hold of me directly, not a problem.
Thank you. And we really do appreciate, you can see there's a variety, there's some diversity on our committee here. We all have different backgrounds and we appreciate your service for each of you. With that, I'm going to keep moving on the agenda. Let's see, your next item is committee updates. Colleen, do you have anything for us or anybody else for any? I'll start with Colleen.
No, not that I know of.
Or anybody else on the committee. I'll just kind of look around. Or okay, I don't see any. Okay, Chloe, do you have anything for? Oh, is that Travis?
Yeah, Travis.
Go ahead, Travis.
So I know one thing, and I don't think Ann could be on, or if she is, she's just in poor cell service, so probably muted, but hopefully by next meeting, we'll actually have some actual numbers to start digging into that'll kind of start laying out not just the theoretical levels of service that we talked about over the last couple of meetings, but also what that means in terms of infrastructure needs and how that translates to impact that fee dollar. So it's not obviously going to be one and done. You guys have actually gone through this before. It's new to me. But it'll be an iterative process where we kind of look at, all right, well, here's the theoretical need, whether it be, just to maintain level of service or rectify deficiencies. But then clearly, as Chief Niemeyer just said, staffing fire stations is enormously expensive. So even if we could build 30 fire stations, we can't afford to staff them. So that's the other thing, the other part of the equation that we'll be going through over the next few months is figuring out not only what do we need to build, but what we afford to build and afford to staff.
Sounds like the finance guy talking in the room. No, we get it, Travis. Thank you. Yeah, you're right. It's a complicated process or formula where you look at new growth, what the property tax increases values will come into the city, what are the added expenses, all those things are being considered. Any other updates? Chloe, do you have anything for us?
Not really, other than just logistic wise. Hopefully next month we will be able to be back up in the Boise Depot where we used to meet. We are finally getting, a year later, we're getting it set up to have virtual meetings. So we will be back there, and same as this month and moving forward, hopefully we get some more people joining us in person. So that will be good. But no, otherwise, I think that's it as far as that's it from our end.
Very good, Chloe. Thank you. I appreciate all your organization, the virtual call stuff. I guess a couple of little items. First of all, I noticed in the chat, it takes Jill 90 minutes to get out the door, so I'm going to laugh at that. And secondly, Chief Niemeyer, yep, finance guy, we got to work on the finance guy. Just get out of the way. We'll be able to solve the problems, Travis. Tony, you raised your hand. Do you have some comment for us?
Yeah, David and Jill, actually, so I missed this in March when you guys got reappointed, and I wanted to say congratulations to getting reappointed to another term, and thank you for agreeing to serve with us again. I'm super excited that you're still with us.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Jill does live in the room, so we're glad Jill's with the committee.
I try to keep my comments off the record.
You're doing fine. I'm not as good at that sometimes. I would ask Corbin, since you're in the room, Chloe, can he sign the minutes on behalf as vice chair? Would that be okay for the meeting today?
Yep, we are just signing them virtually now. So
Okay.
You're good. Thank you.
Need my help with that any further, let me know. I'm
I'm still marveling at getting out the door in 90 seconds.
Quick.
That's amazing to me.
Firemen are good men. They do, and firewomen, they do good work for the city and for the citizens. And yeah, Chief Niemeyer and I have had those discussions about 5-minute response times. and it's legit. I mean, they do their best, and they drive it, they time it various times of the day. So they try really hard to provide a good service to the community, and as Michael was saying, they've got a big heart. They care about the people. Okay, any other further comments? If not, I'll look for motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn the meeting
Nicole
today.
made the motion to adjourn. Tony, you second that?
I will second that motion.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 Gary's, thank you very much, everybody. We can stop recording now.